Alright, let's go ahead and take this time to talk about Kills of the Flower Moon, which I kind of wanted to do all month because I saw it was November 1st when I saw it, and I'm only just now talking about it. So after kind of getting burned out over the months of September and October doing all those videos, actually started to panic at first about doing this, and I was actually going to kind of postpone it even further because it was like, well, it's been so long since I saw it. Am I going to be able to do it justice? Because I didn't like write a whole lot down or anything, and I think it's a movie that's practically flawless. It's if it's not flawless, it's very very close to it. And it was like, how am I gonna do justice talking about that? Because like with Oppenheimer, which I felt the same way about, I talked about for over an hour, and Beau is Afraid, I talked about like in really great detail. And the more I thought about it, the more it was like, well, I don't know how much I need to say about this because number one, I'd imagine a lot of people already know like what happens. Like if you know the general story, like much at all, that's basically what the whole story is. And the idea that even though it's a 3.5 hour movie, it's pretty straightforward and to the point about what it is, basically the whole time. So taking that into account, when you look at Scorsese and the idea that we're living in this, it feels like such this magnificent era that we're in right now, where like all of Scorsese's passion projects that took like decades to come to fruition are coming out in succession, with like Silence and then The Irishman and then this, and it's like it's this whole era of everything coming together. And I think the idea of like Gilliam's Don Quixote movie having come out recently also, even though it was kind of to no fanfare, still it's like it's almost like we're in this era of seeing all these passion projects come in. I don't know if you want to say it about Ridley Scott and Napoleon or not, but yeah, it feels like we're in this area, especially with these movies that have these really massive runtimes. I do find it interesting that when a movie tends to have a massive runtime, I, like everybody else, I have this kind of. I'm kind of pulled back, and it's like, is this gonna earn this? Like, is it really worth it? But my three favorite movies of the year right now are 3 hours or more. So, so far it seems to be working out as far as this particular group. But talking something else about Scorsese's filmography in this movie is it might seem like this is kind of a departure in a sense when you just kind of talk about, what the story is. But when you actually watch the movie and you see the story play out and you're not just kind of hearing like this condensed version or like it's, summarized in like two sentences or something, it's crazy how much this is totally a Scorsese movie. I'm trying to talk about this in a way that doesn't seem insensitive because it's like when the movie opens, essentially, we get a sort of montage of murder, which is a montage of murder is immediately something that you remember seeing in multiple Scorsese. It's like one of Scorsese's trademarks is the montage of murder. But the thing about it is, in those other Scorsese movies where we see this, and it's this, image and feel that we're familiar with, and with Schoonmaker's editing and all that. Um, Usually when we're seeing this, it's criminals. And it's like people that are in a business that basically know the dangers around them and know there's a possibility that they could get wrapped up in what essentially becomes a montage of murder. Whereas with this story, it the people being murdered are completely blindsided. This isn't like, they were caught up in a business and they knew there was a potential risk, that something bad could happen to them or whatever. And it's not that, they did something to piss someone off or they did a deal gone wrong or something. They were killed by greed, essentially. And they were killed by the people that they trusted and they thought were part of this whole community that everybody lived in. And so when you know what's going on here, basically the entire first hour of this movie has such an eerie vibe about it when you see everybody living in harmony, knowing that, one group of people is plotting the genocide of the other. And just like that whole first hour just has that feel to it. And you can see where the movie's kind of broken up as far as where that runtime comes in. Where we have this moment when people are being killed and we know right away what's going on because I to my understanding there was the possibility that this movie could have been told in the format that it was a twist that it was like Hale and Ernest and all of them and everything going on. But to basically make that the plot of the movie, that we know right away what's going on, it feels like not only does it just kind of work narratively, but I feel like it does feel like it's confronting the situation more, that it's not hiding who the villains are. It's saying in plain sight that this is who the villains are, these are who the villains are, this is what's going on. And we just watch this play out for a good couple of hours before we get to our next turning point in the story. And everything in between that is basically like the character work and getting us to. I mean, surely you would feel something regardless if you just know the story well enough to know that these people were completely blindsided by this genocide towards them. But the idea of seeing how integrated they were in this one community and how much they like these people grew up with Hale, the De Niro character, and it's like this whole sort of he's basically like the father figure of the entire town essentially, and the fact that he is where all of this is coming from just really puts the tragedy in it and the unthinkable nature of what's going on here. Like you just see, people being killed over greed, an entire, group of people being killed over greed, and then it's like that in itself seems unfathomable, and it's like, how can a person come to this? But really seeing the detail of how much they trust this person, and like I said, the harmony that they're living in when this starts happening is, it really, like I said, it feels very much like a Scorsese movie, but it's definitely got an air of tragedy we haven't really seen in these portions before. Like The Irishman obviously had a whole other thing going on where it's like, even though it was this criminal that we saw murder so many people throughout the movie with De Niro's character, Frank, in The Irishman, that whole last, 45 minutes where he's just growing old and everything's dying off around him, he's buying his own casket, he's taking a fall and stuff like that, and it's like, even though what that character was doing, you could put yourself in that perspective of this is what getting old is in general. There is a certain tragedy to that, but here the tragedy is all throughout, and it's pretty much never about the people committing murder or committing the crimes. So it's it's very, very much a Scorsese movie, but also definitely something we haven't quite seen from as far as the perspective that we're getting. And so, and I think that was a big talking point also, where it was kind of going to be for a while the movie was going to be from the perspective of them, or it was going to be the mystery angle of who's doing this. And it was kind of, I want to say it was around the time Lily Gladstone got involved in the production is when it kind of shifted, and they were like, oh, let's kind of make it more about Molly and kind of her perspective. And of course, there's been criticism that they still didn't quite do that enough. But I still think there's a balance here as far as the story they wanted to tell, the story we're getting. And of course, when you look at the title itself, the title itself is, Hale and Burkhardt and all them. And so, looking at that, and like I said, seeing the trust, particularly when Gladstone comes in and she says, Ernest takes care of me and stuff like that. But then we'll have scenes of Ernest saying, I love money near as much as I love my wife. And you just see the whole, and the thing about it also is the way they play up the love story between them. How much you want to put love in quotes here, at least from Ernest's perspective. But the idea, and they do kind of play in to the idea of Ernest claimed all the way till the end that he really did love her despite all this, and how you want to take that. But the idea of kind of getting, is the criticism that Scorsese almost always gets is that he's glorifying his bad characters. And I can imagine this probably received something similar, but the movie definitely has arcs in it to where it's that sort of ambiguous feeling that you have for a lot of Scorsese movies, where it's you're kind of, when you see an individual sort of objective or something, when you see Henry Hill, being stalked by the helicopter trying to do all of his errands at once, and it's you weirdly find yourself rooting for him. Like, you want to see him succeed just because it would be satisfying because of the chaos of everything that's going on. And it's like in individual moments, you can, like, hope for a bad character to succeed or whatever. With Ernest, the movie never really gives him that. Certainly doesn't give Hale that. Um, but there's still this feeling of seeing these individual moments, but they're seen from the sort of sympathetic angle of the victim that's ultimately in the scene, like whether it be Molly's sister, Cara Jade Myers, who is, we see her whole sort of arc play out. And another one that really stood out was Henry, because before Henry is killed, we get to know his character quite a bit, um, where they basically show like the status of mental health at this particular time and amongst these people, and it's like that's something that I really wasn't expecting. That was a really good detail and definitely really showed the sort of human side of people. Like, usually people just kind of get, killed off in a movie and that's about it, and you don't really see like how much humanity there was in them. Like, there isn't enough time. But in a 3.5 hour movie, you do have enough time where we can really get to know the Henry of this movie and what his troubles are, his mental health troubles, and what he's going through. And then once again, when the real tragedy sets, it was already a tragedy anyway, if you just kind of see it from an outside perspective. But now that we've really gotten to know this character, there's going to be tragedy in every single kill that happens, and there's a lot of them. And so, but yeah, so that's as far as glorifying the characters or anything like that. And it's like that's where the perspective is in this movie at this point. So coming back to Molly and what Gladstone is doing, what I actually thought, because obviously Gladstone's like the best actress frontrunner at the moment, and she's definitely getting the praise that she has earned with this performance. Something that I haven't really seen talked about that I feel like is a major strength of her performance is another Scorsese staple, which is the narration. I feel like a lot is coming through in just her narration, actually, in those moments also. Where she's talking, like, the moment where she's talking about, like, the hate around her heart and stuff like that, and, like, building walls around herself. And that sets in that whole theme also of the tragedy of it and the betrayal of it, where this is somebody who clearly has like walls up for a reason, and Gladstone really plays that coldness well, where we kind of see the coldness kind of start to die down a little bit in these early scenes with Ernest, and that she actually, like I said, whether he does for real or not, I guess is up for debate, but she falls in love with him, and we see that. And then, like I said, when you see this whole arc with her, of her kind of letting her walls come down a little bit, and that cold turning into warmth, and the betrayal that we know is coming. Like, this whole thing is orchestrated. We know this from the get-go. And so that whole thing, and seeing how that plays out, and even though she's not aware of this for a long time, she still is able to make the character not feel only like a victim. Like, there's real strengths of the character apart from that, where she just feels like a real person. The indigenous actors in this also, especially, like, obviously, we have names like, it's, DiCaprio and De Niro and Jesse Plemons and all of them, and bringing greatness to this. But the thing about it, I don't know if it's just because they're not, famous faces like DiCaprio and De Niro, but the indigenous actors, it doesn't even feel like you're watching actors. Like, everybody's so natural here. I especially liked the guy that's like the leader of the council, and then we get those moments also where like he's talking about his trust in Hale and stuff like that. And like I said, the guy that plays Henry, it's like you don't even feel like you're watching acting. You feel like you're just observing what's actually happening. And it's and putting that into perspective also is those performances on top of like the production design and just everything else going into this. It's definitely one of those movies that makes you feel like you're really, really in the moment. And I think that was another thing that was really important to them as far as how this movie was made and how it just sort of puts us right there. And it doesn't just feel like we're watching, a movie or getting a history lesson or whatever. It feels like we're just watching all of this happen. And then occasionally you'll have moments like the paddling of DiCaprio by De Niro, which for starters does feel like this sort of full circle moment of them having worked together in this boy's life, and this is like their big reunion, where De Niro was like his abusive stepfather. Um, in this scene, you talk about the insanity of what's going on here, and it's like, how do people get to this level of, you know, greed and just being the absolute psychopaths that could pull this off? And then you see scenes like this, like the paddling of DiCaprio, where it's just so, everything's just so unhinged. It's like surreal what you're looking at, and it's like when it really kind of puts you in that mindset of these people are just not on the same plane of existence as this whole, like, talking about the divide between these two groups of people, one of which is killing the other. And like I said, that the idea of seeing them live in harmony, not knowing the dangers of these people, it's kind of terrifying to watch this play out and see what's really behind the closed doors of the orchestrating of all this. And it's, yeah, so that's basically how they handle the first like couple of hours or so. Another there's little standout performances everywhere. By the way, there's the guy that plays Bill. I really like. There's that scene in particular where like the confrontation with Bill, where you just have like these individual moments of like suspense and stuff like that that really stand out. Steve Whitting as who's usually like a warm presence playing the shady doctor. Pat Healy, who I always love showing up. Like all actors like big and small that you may recognize. And some, like previous Scorsese people, like the guy that plays Sally Bugs and The Irishman being here. Just all actors kind of have these little individual moments at some point. Once again, allowed by that very long runtime. But the other thing is talking about that runtime. Actually, I guess we can go into that real quick, which is there was like this whole talk about people wanting intermissions to come back, and I don't quite know how I feel about sort of breaking the flow of movies. I get it, how it was a thing, like back in the 50s and stuff like that. Sometimes all the way through to the 60s and 70s in certain cases, but I don't know. I feel like this movie in particular moves well enough that it's fine the way it is. If you were to put an intermission in it, I guess a good place would be after Jesse Plemons' first scene, like when he comes to the door, and then when DiCaprio's watching him out the window, that would be where it kind of fades to black, and then we kind of have our moment that's the investigation angle of it, where the Jesse Plemons character kind of gets to take over the movie a little bit. But apart from that, I still feel like it's fine. I will say, an anecdote that I have for this movie that I love is that when I went to it, it was in like the middle of the week, in like the middle of the day, and the reason I went at that time was because I didn't really want to be around people, and there still ended up being quite a few people in there. And the thing that really shocked me about this was in 3.5 hours, trailers plus 3.5 hours, I saw the same person got up twice, I guess to go to the bathroom or whatever. Nobody else got up, ever, in the 3.5 hours. They were actually pretty silent the whole time, and the only thing I can take away from that was everybody there was that engrossed. Because it's very easy to say, oh, it doesn't feel its length. Oh, it doesn't feel 3.5 hours. And, at certain times, even when you say that about movies, there'll be portions of a movie where it's like, you can start to feel the length eventually. But I feel like I can sincerely say this did not feel like 3.5 hours. That first 2 hours especially is so, like, we just go from moment to moment so fluidly, and there's always a performance, or the way a scene plays out, or whatever, or just the setting itself in general. There's always something to keep your attention occupied in a way, and to keep you involved in these characters and this story, which, like I said, is only going to amplify the tragedy of it when, whatever happens, happens. So, that's something where I don't think like I said, all three 3 or 3.5 hour movies that I consider to be the three best movies of the year right now, all feel like they kind of have this sort of constant flow to them that actually surprisingly warrants the length and all that. So, but I can see it being off-putting. Like, it's one of those cases where if you're not into it kind of right away, you're probably going to really, really struggle with a runtime like that. But this is surprisingly, and I just watched The Irishman. It's like a Thanksgiving tradition for me to watch The Irishman around Thanksgiving. So I just rewatched it like a few days ago, and it's still just, I could live in that movie. I mean, like, not like literally in it because everybody's so fucking dangerous, but you get what I mean. I could live in the atmosphere that Scorsese created, and that flow that Schoonmaker creates, and all that, and the production design and all that, and putting us in a certain place. And that just that satisfying feeling of watching a movie that story just flows so nicely, which is something obviously Scorsese and Schoonmaker have perfected at this point, long since perfected at this point. So getting into the last like hour and a half or so, where we do kind of start to get Ernest kind of having a bit of an arc, and talking about that idea of, are we supposed to feel for him in any way whatsoever, and how ambiguous or not ambiguous is the movie about that. What I love about this and how perfectly this is done is that it's a very human moment to where you could say Ernest has a turning point. It's a very, very late, a very too late, not for the movie, but for him as a person, turning point. But the idea that the last scene of the movie makes sure to tell us this guy is unforgivable. Like, it's like I can see the movie being dismissed as, okay, I get this moment, but should we feel for him? I feel icky. That the movie seems like it's trying to make me feel for him. Um, if you wait till the last scene of the movie, it's very clear how we're supposed to feel about Ernest Burkhart, and the way DiCaprio is able to play that though is where we do have this moment where he has such a human reaction to a piece of news, and that this turns him around to an extent. Um, we do feel that in the moment, and we feel the turning point. The turning point doesn't feel like, oh, he felt this way, now he's just going to do this. It's very much this turning point of things that happen. And if DiCaprio couldn't sell this, that wasn't going to feel that way. So, obviously, DiCaprio is going to sell a big moment. That's what he does. That's what he does. That's what he's done for a very long time. So, as far as, people coming in later cast-wise, like John Lithgow and Brendan Fraser and stuff like that, I've seen a lot of criticisms, especially thrown Fraser's way, where he feels a bit out of place, and he feels very over-the-top, tonally, given what we've seen before. But I think the reason I didn't mind that is, he does play it very, very big, but I can understand the criticisms of it being tonally out of place, but the thing about it is, I like the idea of the contrast where Fraser's big scene especially is him yelling in DiCaprio's face. And there's something satisfying about that, where we're seeing Ernest kind of picked up from one place that he knows and that he's lived in and dropped into another. And just the contrast of Fraser's performance completely changing the tone, like, in those moments, kind of shows how confronting this is to Ernest, as far as the situation that he's found himself in. And so, and the idea of, like, when you're in this, first 2 hours of the movie where everybody feels like a real character, and it feels like this very lived-in environment, and then you get this very theatrical delivery from Brendan Fraser that's right in Ernest's face. It definitely feels like it's this sort of changing of Ernest sort of realizing, basically, to an extent, how fucked up, like, what he was doing as far as, like, what he's going to register as far as this tonal shift. Which I think is not just the point that Scorsese and Fraser were making, but the point the character Fraser's playing was making. So, I don't mind Fraser going super big like that. So, and I'll always be happy when John Lithgow shows up, even if it's just for a little bit. So, I feel like that's basically what we've got here. Like I said, as far as, like, the scope of it also, like the way it's shot, obviously is going to be brought up a lot for very good reason. That last shot, especially as it fades to black, is pretty incredible, and I love what that shot represents also. But the idea also of when I'm talking about the scope, where it's like and talking about the length of it on top of what it looks like and how the movie feels. There is a moment in the middle where I was maybe like, okay, I can kind of feel the length a little bit. It's essentially where like Molly and Ernest are kind of like sick in a sense, we'll say, as to not say too much. Like I don't know what people know and don't know as far as spoilers go, but where everything starts to feel kind of hazy and almost like this sort of almost like out of body kind of thing. And the way fire is used here, in what's going on in the background, I know it doesn't seem like much of a compliment these days, given the movie's reputation these days, to be compared to this. But I mean, when we're talking about scope and all that, this sort of middle fire portion feels very much like the fire in Gone with the Wind, where like it kind of feels like it happens in a very similar point, not just in the runtime, but in kind of the story itself, where everything just kind of burns. It very much felt like Scorsese was kind of evoking the sort of Gone with the Wind, like scope and vibe and all that. And obviously, something else that's been talked about a lot is Robert Robertson's score, which, like I said, his it's a shame that we won't have this now, but the idea his style being incorporated into Scorsese's movies is something that's really like the score in The Irishman was like one of the unsung heroes of The Irishman, and just that sort of the way it was sort of to it really brought the vibe and the feel of it without feeling overbearing, but you could very much feel like it's very hard to really notice a score without that score having to be overbearing in order to get you to notice it that much. But these Scorsese Robertson collaborations were like the perfect example of how the audience really notices the score, but it only helps the vibe. It never hinders it. All of that. So, like I was saying, I don't really see any problems in this movie for me personally. Like, I don't mind the length, I don't mind the structure, I don't mind the perspectives that we get, I don't mind all the different characters we get to see that kind of get to be lived in before tragedy strikes. Just the whole vibe of it. I'm also really glad to have seen it in a theater because I got really worried when it was like, yeah, it's Apple. It's like, fuck. And they're so fucking terrible at releases, but the fact that it was this collaboration, I think, with Paramount, and it was like, no, we're gonna do, like, this will be the first time an Apple movie gets, like, a big, big release. And it's like, if you were gonna start that, this would have been a good time. So, I think that's how I feel about this movie. So, I'll leave that at that, and I don't know what I want to review. I've seen Rustin, but I haven't watched The Killer yet. And, like, Saltburn's coming up, which I'm gonna see. The Holdovers is like a little bit out of town of here, which I may or may not do depending on situations. I don't know, but as far as like doing another video, I don't know. We've got 3 live videos in a row coming up, and I'm still fucking tired from September and October. So we're just gonna see what happens. We still got Owen and Ashley and them doing all their stuff, so we'll figure it out as we go, and as award season really kicks in now. So until whatever the next thing is, I think that's it.